So let us make a start. And the first thing to say is, where are we? Well, we're in the Shropshire Hills. And actually, we are up on an area of highland that is 7 miles long, 3 miles across, and it is a designated conservation area, as we call it in the UK, an AONB, which stands for Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. And that covers a total area of 5,000 acres or 2,000 hectares. And this area is known as the Long Mynd. That is M-Y-N-D. It's an old Welsh word for mountain. So the Long Mountain, this sort of elongated raised area. And it's one of several ranges of hills and high ground in this part of England, the county of Shropshire. Now, Shropshire is one of the largest counties in England, but it is one of the least densely populated. And it is a very rural county. It's known for its scenery, it's known for its agriculture, it's known for its wildlife, has lots and lots of beautiful villages, as you rightly say, Marlene. Lots of nice market towns, no cities. The biggest town in Shropshire is Telford, which wasn't designated until the 1950s. So it is a very rural area. And I'm going to go somewhere where I haven't actually tested the signal, because as a couple of you are eagle-eyed and spotted something that is worth definitely going to look at, and that is some of the Long Mynd ponies. They have wild ponies on these hills, not many of them. So if you see them, it's good to go and try and take a look, because there are only around 30 or 40 of them in this whole area. So if we can get to see them, it's always good. A lot of sheep up here, a lot more sheep, thousands of sheep. And these hills have been grazed by sheep for thousands of years. It's one of the areas of the country that was very well known for its wool production. Medieval wool trade in England was so important to our national economy. And along with places like the Cotswolds, Shropshire was one of the crucial parts of the country. And they had a native breed of sheep called Long Mynd sheep that had a fantastic wool, and it was why the wool trade in this area was very successful. And a lot of the paths, and even this road that we're about to walk along a little bit, they follow ancient trackways that were used for trade and for people to get their livestock and the wool to markets. So people have been living here and using these hills for round about 4,000 years, we think. So since the Bronze Age. Originally, these hills would all have been forested, but they were cleared for agriculture about 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. The trees were cleared and people started to have their settlements and their roads and trackways on the higher ground, because it was safer. You might have got wetter, it might have been windier, but if you might be able to keep a better eye on anyone who might be trying to come and steal your sheep or attack your village or whatever it might have been. Now I'm hoping these ponies are there. Ah, yes, there they are. So, human interaction with these hills has a very long history through the farming, the grazing. You won't find cattle up here anymore. There was a time when you would, but part of the land management was, back in the 1960s, the National Trust took over the stewardship of the Long Mynd, and it was being grazed by 30,000 sheep and ponies and cattle, and all of the heather and the traditional plants were starting to be in pretty bad shape. So one of the things the National Trust had to do was negotiate with the local people who have had rights to graze their animals on this land for hundreds and hundreds of years to reduce the numbers. And now there are only about 3,000 sheep in the summer and about 1,700 in the winter grazing Long Mynd. Marlene, no, there were sheep back where we started. Some big sheep. These are the ponies. Beautiful wild ponies. Welsh mountain ponies. No, I thought at first the same thing, Marlene, but then I looked a bit further around and saw the ponies. That one's looking very cautious because there's a dog just behind me on a lead having a little drink, but ponies are very cautious of him. So all of the undergrowth you can see here, all of this is heather, and it's just starting to get towards blooming. So in the summertime, you can just see it's starting to take on from brown, it's starting to take on a purpley colour. And by the summertime, this will be a riot of purple heather. And since they've cut down on the overgrazing and so on, and really protected the landscape, the heather has had a real resurgence, as has a lot of the wildlife. Beautiful little ponies. Let's stand and watch them for a couple of minutes. So the heather is very important. One of the other types of animal that is very important here, or bird, is the red grouse. Lived on these uplands, but due to shooting from the 19th century onwards, the grouse numbers were reduced to just 24 pairs by the 1960s. Now they're way up again. So the grouse, what's the plural of grouse? Grouses? Grouse? Grice? I don't know. They're much healthier numbers now. And there's a lot of other great types of wildlife up here as well. This morning when I was up here doing a signal check, I saw a red kite, beautiful bird of prey that at one time was pretty much extinct in Britain and has been gradually, through selective, has been reintroduced. And the red kite is now doing pretty well. I can't zoom in, Valerie, because I'm not using the new app, because when I tested it this morning, I have a 5 out of 5 signal on the old app, and I had no connection at all on the new app. The ponies are wild. They are the descendants of domestic ponies that would have been used centuries ago for carrying loads. Look at the sheep running along. I don't know. Sheep are running along. So there's a lot of great wildlife here on the Long Mynd and around the Shropshire Hills. But it's also important, it's not just what is on top of the landscape that's important. Underneath the landscape is important as well, and that's the rocks. John, the number of horses is not controlled. I mean, there's no culling or anything like that. There's some of the local people look after them, they make sure they're okay, but they are wild. You know, they don't feed them or anything. They come and make sure, and if any of them are sick or anything like that, they do tend to them. But the very ground that we're standing on here in Shropshire is always important, because Shropshire geologically is one of the most diverse places in the world. And that's not me exaggerating. Suffice to say that geologists recognise 13 geological periods in the history of the Earth. And you can find 11 out of those 13 here in Shropshire. So it is really important, and it's actually Shropshire where modern geology as a field of study actually was established in the 19th century, particularly a man by the name of Roderick Murchison, who was from Shropshire. And by studying the rocks in Shropshire, they were able to get a great understanding of the different time periods, and they could use the fossils that were in the different kinds of rocks to see how life had developed over the years. And they could understand things like what we call the Cambrian explosion, which was when a whole lot of more sophisticated life appeared or evolved on Earth. And that was something that they actually understood by seeing lots of the older rocks with no fossils, and then suddenly they started to appear. MB, yes, the grouse were hunted down to that 24 pairs. So oh, thank you. I don't know. Thank you, I think, Tina. So the rocks here are super important, and the Long Mynd, the rocks we're standing on now under my feet, I feel pretty safe standing here. These rocks have been here for about 600 million years. They are Precambrian rocks. And it's thought that these rocks were formed when Shropshire, what we now think of as Shropshire, was close to the Antarctic. That's very cheeky, MB. And I think Emma should be quite offended as well, because she's my younger sister by 3 years. So through tectonic plates shifting, Shropshire migrated from close to the Antarctic, and now it's where it is today. The different types of rock were forming over the different times. I don't care about being teased, MB. I'm used to it by now. The speed that it migrated was about 3 centimetres per year. I presume it's still migrating at that speed. That's about the speed I'm going to be walking tomorrow morning after I've walked up and down all these hills today, planning and doing these tours. So let's just look over into the distance. And in the distance, we can just see the shadow of hills stretching off northwards and westwards. And up there, we can find rock formation, really distinctive, that you can go up there and see, that are limestone rocks on top of the hills. And they're all kinds of weird and wonderful shapes. And one of the big outcrops is known as the Devil's Chair. And according to a local legend, the devil was carrying a load of rocks in his apron. I don't know why the devil had an apron on, but stay with me, go with me. And the devil stumbled and dropped the rocks out of his apron and just couldn't be bothered to pick them all up again and left them there. But they say that every midsummer, the devil comes and he sits on those pile of rocks, which is his chair, and all of his followers, the witches and the warlocks and whatever else there might be around here, they go up there and they have their ceremonies and they elect their king for the year, or queen. That's just one of the legends. These are Welsh mountain ponies. So they would once have been used as pack animals, and the ones we have now, the wild ones, are descendants of those. And they're having a good feast on the heather. Yes, you. Now, one of the other most famous legends of the Long Mynd definitely involves horses, not little ponies like these, but war horses, because it's a version of a legend that you find in lots of parts of the country, which is called the Wild hunt. The wild hunt is to do with ghostly horsemen riding out across the moors on a dark night or on a misty day like the one last time I was up here. And the wild hunt is something that lots of people report seeing with these sort of at times of trouble. It's supposed to be a portent of trouble on the way when you see the wild hunt. But here, the wild hunt has a version, and it's based on history because it's the legend of Wild Edric. Tina, I'm going to talk about the down in the valleys in a little while, if that's okay. I'll bear with me and we'll get there. So Wild Edric, who was he? Well, we won't get there. We're not going all the way down into the town, but you know what I mean. Edric was an Anglo-Saxon nobleman, so an important sort of local ruler in this area in the 11th century. And when Britain or England was conquered by the Normans under King I, William the Conqueror, there was a lot of resistance, and Edric was one of those local leaders who refused to bend the knee to King William and carried on fighting for several years. Now, the invasion happened in 1066, but in 1070, he was finally defeated by King William and had to submit. And he subsequently went on to actually fight for King William over in France. That was not something that went down very well with his people on his land. I'm sure you don't want to see a picture of the horse urinating on the heather. Edric is spelled either Edric or sometimes it's the old Anglo-Saxon Aedric. And so, according to legend, after Edric had, as they saw it, betrayed his origins and thrown his lot in with the conqueror, the local people locked him and his warrior band in, depending on who telling the legend, either a cave or a lead mine, which there were to the north of here. And they would ride out at times of national emergency. So it's a little bit like the wild hunt. And so people say that they've seen these horsemen galloping across the hills of the Long Mynd at times like before the Napoleonic Wars, before the First World War, before the Second World War, and so on. So it's a little bit like King Arthur waiting, although I don't think Edric and his huntsmen ever actually do anything. They just come and ride around to, I don't know why, to let people know that something's going to happen, which they kind of find out soon enough. It's a little bit of a strange legend as far as I'm concerned. But, but that's the legend of Edric. Now, we've seen one or two sheep, and I talked a little bit about the wool trade. And the valley we can see just over the way is called Carding Mill Valley. And carding was a very important process in the wool trade. It's where the wool is combed to prepare it for use and prepare it for sale. And originally it was a manual process using combs and teasels originally from nature. But in the 18th century, of course, technology developed, and Arkwright, who you may well have been to his mills with me up in the Peak District at Cromford, he developed a carding machine, a water-powered carding machine. And so over here, next to the Long Mynd, oh, my signal has just done something very funny. I think I've got a little bit of a dip. So if you can't hear me or see very well, give me a second, and hoping to get over the hump. Yeah, it's much better. It's getting a bit better now. I did say I was taking you up to see the ponies somewhere I hadn't tested the signal. So they built a carding mill using this technology of arkwrights, and they used the water from one of the fast-flowing streams down in the valley and created this mill. Some of the buildings from it are still there, and the fast-flowing mill race stream is still there as well. Cardingmill Valley is where you can find the National Trust Cafe and some other facilities. So this is very typical of the Long Mynd. You have this very kind of sparsely vegetated hills with the very steep valleys. Over here on the eastern side, on the western side, the slope is a little bit less. But I mean, we're not that high. Shropshire Hills are beautiful, but they're not that high. The highest point on the Long Mynd is only about 500 metres or 1,600 feet above sea level. So just to spin around and give you an example, the hill just across the way there is called Burway Hill. That's only about 400 metres or about 1,250 feet above sea level. So I'm going to get over this ridge and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the Leslie is in the house. Hi, Leslie. Leslie, we can see today. You've missed the ponies, though. Now, let's get a bit closer. You get a postcard of the sheep. There we go, Tina. I'll try and go, hello. Oh, that's nice. You look right at the camera. Some of the sheep are a little bit skittish at the moment because they have their young with them. So they are, I can't see that one. The young ones with them, and yeah, big sheep, little ponies. The red mark will be the mark from the farmer to identify it as belonging to a particular herd. So we've got another good signal spin here. Wendy, I'm not sure what breed of sheep these particular ones are. They're not the Long Mynd sheep that they used for their wool in medieval times. Okay, so I hope anybody can see and hear me, because we got a little bit of we got a signal issue here. This is where it was full signal earlier on when I was testing this, so it's Leslie's fault. I'm blaming Leslie 100%. It's the witches. Well, it's the witches. Edric chasing me. We blame MB, okay. I think as I get over this little hump here, I should get a good signal, because I'm getting back to where now it might be very difficult to see now, it's getting quite hazy, but straight in the distance, there's right on the skyline what you would say would look like a classic volcano. And a lot of people have said over the years that it is a volcano, but it's not. It's one of the best known and highest of the Shropshire Hills. It's called the Reikin. It is actually made of volcanic rock, because along the valley here, there's a fault line called the Stretton Fault. And so a lot of the hills here are thrown up by volcanic activity, but they're not actually volcanoes. They're volcanic vents. And so the rock is thrust up to create these hills. And the Reikin is known for a couple of things. There's a great legend about how it got there, so I'm going to tell you that one first, because it's a great legend. it's all about a giant, and a giant who had a particular disagreement with the town of Shrewsbury. I don't know what Shrewsbury had done to upset him, but Shrewsbury had done something to upset him. And he was on his way to deposit a whole load of rocks and soil and earth in the River Severn, because he thought if he dammed the River Severn, nobody in Shrewsbury would be able to have any water, and so that would kind of destroy the town and everything there, all their trade and everything. But on the way, he was walking across Shropshire, and he met on the road a cobbler coming back from market, and the cobbler had a big sack of shoes and boots over his shoulder. And the giant said, how much further is it to Shrewsbury? Because I'm carrying all this stuff there to destroy the town by damming the River Severn. Now, this cobbler wasn't very impressed because all his customers were in Shrewsbury, but he was very quick thinking. And he said to the giant, oh, you won't get there today. You won't even get there tomorrow. Look at this sack of, I've worn out all of these pairs of shoes and boots, and I've still not got back from Shrewsbury home yet. And the giant thought, oh no, perhaps I don't dislike Shrewsbury that much, actually. And so he just deposited his load of rocks and soil and earth, and the pile that it made we now call the Reikin. And next to the Reikin is a little hill called the Urquhart. It's known as the Reikin's little brother. And they say that that is where the giant scraped some soil off his boot with his spade. So great story of how the Reikin came about. But it is volcanic rock from the vents along the Stretton Fault in reality. And it is well-known phrase, all round the Reikin. And in this area, and even certainly down in Birmingham and the West Midlands, to say that someone is going all round the Reikin, it means going the long way round. So, you know, if it takes you a long while to get there, you can say, well, the road was closed and I had to go all round the Reikin to get here. I mean, you didn't literally come up to Shrewsbury and down to Ludlow and, you know, so like all round the houses, exactly. The other thing, though, it can be used, like all round the houses, it can be used figuratively as well. So if someone is explaining something in a very long-winded way, you can say that they went all round the Reikin to get there. And I say it in everyday conversation because I've lived in Birmingham for a long time. Jack Sparrow phrase, I never thought of that. So I'm just going to walk up to this little peak here. Oh, a couple of nice little sheep on that side here, look. Oh, there they are. You say it because you used to have a friend from Birmingham, didn't you, Emma, that said it? Leslie, yeah, but you literally go around the Reikin walking on it when you come back here. Hello. It's all right. It's not going to hurt you. I'm just having a little conversation with the sheep. It's okay. Your famous sheep. Lots of postcards of you. Got some great views here. Do really feel like, you know, you just have such great views all around. And if I pan around from here, we've got the Reikin and we've got Caradoc. And down in the valley, we're going to go a little bit closer, but the town down in the valley is called Church Stretton. And Church Stretton is the sort of the largest, it's not a very big town, but it's the sort of largest town immediately in the area of the Long Mynd, and was a market town. So this was kind of the local market for the livestock and the wool. The main markets really were Ludlow, Shrewsbury. But Church Stretton is quite a nice town, quite a nice little town, lots of places to stay because it's quite a base for people exploring this area. As you can imagine, a lot of hikers, a lot of cyclists, those kinds of things, and those kinds of activities. I think there's a part of the area up here where you can do paragliding. I may be wrong, but you know, lots of outdoor pursuits, very, very popular. And so Church Stretton has a lot of places to stay. The railway, it's got a railway station, and the railway came there in the 1850s, and that was when this area started to develop as a visitor attraction. And they used to market Church Stretton as Little Switzerland. A little bit optimistic. I mean, very, very little in terms of the mountains, but you'll find actually quite a few Alpine style buildings in the town and around the town that people built for as guest houses and those kinds of things, to kind of tie in with this this little sort of name of Little Switzerland. They were even more optimistic with one of the waterfalls. There's one of the waterfalls at the end of the Carding Mill Valley called the Light Spout Waterfall. Very nice, pleasant waterfall, but they marketed that as England's own Little Niagara. Yeah, I think, you know, enough said. I suppose back in the day when nobody had ever seen these places or these things, and nobody used to travel very far outside their own country, it was a bit easier to get away with those kinds of hyperbolic marketing pictures. Now, there's one of the other hills I particularly want to mention, and it's the one that we can see dead center of our screen here. It's one of the highest in this area. It's also Precambrian rock, like the Long Mynd, and it's called Caer Caradoc, which means the fortress or homestead of Caradoc. And Caradoc was, and now before I tell you about Caradoc, the man who went up a hill and came down a mountain, yeah, it was set somewhere around here, but I'm not sure where. It was certainly set in somewhere, or certainly filmed somewhere in Shropshire, but I can't remember exactly where. Caer Caradoc, on the top of it, it is one of the places in Shropshire where they discovered an Iron Age fort. Now, we call a hill fort, we call these sort of settlements on top of hills. They look like fortifications, but often they probably were not military. You know, in the last few centuries BC, it was just that people built their settlements on this high ground and put fences around them to keep their animals and to keep the people safe. And again, they built them on high ground so you could see the bad guys coming. There are actually 50 of them in Shropshire altogether. So it's one of the biggest concentrations of hill forts anywhere, of Iron Age settlement. So we know that in the last few centuries BC, this is what the Romans... Leslie, thank you. Easy for you to type. Llanmynech? I don't know. Not sure. So one of the things the Romans found was all of these hill forts, and that's where the people were living when the Romans were trying to conquer Britain. The Romans came here in 43 AD, and they started to work their way up through the country. Some of the tribes were submitted to the Romans. Some of them already had quite strong trade links with the Romans before they actually invaded. Some of them resisted. And a lot of the tribes in this part of England resisted. And one of the tribal leaders, who was one of the main resistance fighters against the Romans, was a man by the name of Caradoc. That was his Welsh name. The Romans gave him a Latinized version, which is what he's best known as to history, and that is Caractacus. And Caractacus was fighting the Romans, and his last stand against the Roman legions was said to be here in Shropshire on that very hill, which is why it bears his name to this day, Caer Caradoc. Now, Caradoc lost that battle. He fled northwards, but he was turned over to the Romans by one of the tribes that was allied with them. He was taken to Rome. The idea was that he was going to be executed, but he was allowed to meet the Emperor Claudius and gave a speech. And Claudius was so impressed with him that he decided not to execute him. He lived under house arrest for several years in Rome, which is quite bizarre, really. You don't really think of Roman emperors showing too much mercy to their conquered enemies. Maybe certainly wouldn't have happened in the time of Julius Caesar. I don't think, the Gauls, like Vercingetorix, they were all publicly humiliated in executions in Rome. So that's where Caradoc would have been and where he would have been fighting against. Donette, you want a hill named after you? That's something to hope for, isn't it? You'd like to see me, Titus? Okay, there we are. There's me. Hello. I'm going to just head on over this last little hump and down a little way, and we can just take another look back down the valley. We'll get a slightly better. Donette is a good name for a hill, yeah. Quite far from, no, I'm not very far at all from my Chariot MB. Yeah, Church Stretton is in a beautiful location, isn't it, down there in the valley. Lots of sheep around. Let's finish with these beautiful animals here. Oh, thank you, Anne, that's so kind. You know, the road through here is a public road. It's it's very steep as you come up from Church Stretton, as you can imagine. You can see how far down in the valley the town is. It's yeah, it's pretty steep, but Titus, I will try to get as close as I can, but they have their young with them, so they're quite skittish at the moment. Might get a nice one here. There we go. Probably not going to get much closer than this without them running off while they've got the youngsters with them. Get a nice sheep. And wary of me. I don't blame them. Thank you, Louise. I like to be able to talk about geology. It's not something I get to talk about very often. And no, I can't zoom because I'm not using the new app yet because it doesn't work. I can't get a connection on it. Hello, Nicholas. Hello. So yeah, it is a beautiful location, and I'm so glad that the weather today has been a little bit more welcoming for us, and that we've been able to really enjoy some of the views. I think I have that view with the road, and as soon as the cars go, very, very quiet. Isn't that beautiful? It's not as much bird song as there was this morning when I was here. I think they start probably roosting for a lot of them. Nesting and egg laying season. Oh, what's this up here? No, it's just a crow, I think. Can I show behind me? I certainly can, Tina. I'll turn around and look back up. And I'll definitely try to repeat this tour again in the summer when the heather is in flower, because it will look absolutely beautiful. It'll be harder to find a time when it's as quiet as this in the summertime, but it has been, I think, we've been pretty lucky today. And I hope you've enjoyed this little walk. I think, yeah, the ponies were definitely a bonus because I hadn't seen any all of the time today that I was around here. And they kind of just appeared there just at the right time. And we were able to get there without losing signal, which was good. The sheep are owned by local farmers. And they are, you know, taken down off the hills at requisite times of year. This is common grazing land. It's not enclosed like most of the English landscape. It's not enclosed into smaller fields. They are ancient grazing rights, absolutely Karen free ranging. And the local people have these ancient rights to graze their animals on the Long Mynd, but they negotiate with the landowners about how many they're allowed to have. And the landowners now are the National Trust. The National Trust, to be able to do that and to be able to manage the landscape on the Long Mynd, they had to buy the title to the land, which meant that the National Trust officially is the Lord of the Manor here on the Long Mynd. They have this medieval title, Lord of the Manor, the National Trust. And they look after it for all of us and make sure that it's not overgrazed, but that the animals can graze here and the people can use the landscape as they have for many, many thousands of years.